special meeting and budget committee meeting to order. 6:32 p.m. Thursday, April 1st, 2021. Ms. Milton, roll call, please.
Mr. Orris.
Here.
Mr. Slocum.
Here.
Mr. Burway.
Present.
Mr. Jinks.
Here.
Ms. Nichols. Ms. Pavano.
Here.
Mr. Talbot.
Here.
Mr. Veliver.
Here.
Mr. Walsh. We have a quorum
Here.
present.
Thank you, Ms. Milton. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance
To the flag
to the flag
of the
of the United States of America
and to the
and
republic
to the republic
for
which it stands,
one
one
nation,
nation,
under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with
with
liberty
liberty and
for all.
justice for all.
Okay, first item on the agenda is proposed fiscal year 21-22 operating budget, annual capital budget, 5-year capital expenditure plan to include public works and parks, water pollution control, and public property. With that, I'll turn it over to our budget chair, Mr. Borwery.
Thank you, Mayor Orris. Appreciate that. Tonight, we have one of our larger budgets, the largest on the general town government side, and it is the public works. And Mr. Nowotny is here, all smiles and already in his office to run through the budget. But I first ask Mr. Kimball if he's got any opening remarks he would like to make.
I think with this one, we've got a lot of ground to cover, so we'll probably just dive right in. I'll
right.
be sharing my screen for a little bit through a presentation. And if it's okay with everyone, we'll kind of jump off and on that presentation as we get to different sections of the budget. Rather than kind of hit it all at once, we may go into the detail lines and then back to that division. So if that, I think we'll probably just turn it over to Mr. Nowotny to get started, if it pleases.
All right.
Sure.
Good evening, sir.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Holiday evening or whatever, eve before a holiday, as they say. Appreciate your time tonight, and we'll try to keep it brief and moving along and delve into whatever you would like to discuss in most detail. I'm joined by Scott Hallier, who is our superintendent of our treatment plant. So he'll be taking part of the presentation, and then I'll take the bulk of it. But if Mr. Kimball can share his first slide, we'll move it right along.
Hopefully, is that coming up? I'm having a little issue here. Do you guys see the slide there?
We see a truck now, yes.
Truck. Okay, well, then we're in good shape. All right.
How fitting, George, that you start with a truck.
It's a new one. It's a new one when you don't need any more.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's one of our 20-year-old ones.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, this is the subject of tonight. As Mr. Borway said earlier, it's water pollution control, public works and engineering, and public properties. So we'll move right on to the next slide. And this is just a little overview of kind of what public works does. And I know most of the counselors are well aware of what we do in town and what our responsibilities are. But for anybody tuning in, or just as a refresher, Cheshire is a really full developed town. I know folks like to think of it as a quaint place to live and work, and it is. It's a great town with many special attributes, but it is a fully developed town with infrastructure. So we've got 120 miles of sewer throughout town. We maintain about 180 vehicles between the town vehicles, Board of Ed, some specialty vehicles, police, some fire vehicles and things. We've got 152 miles of road and climbing at this point with all the development that's been going on the last year or two. We have 21 town buildings, about 200,000 square feet of town buildings that are maintained, 1,500 acres of open space that the grounds folks maintain, 5 major parks and / sports facilities, which some of them are, which are maintained, 115 miles of sidewalk throughout town, a linear trail of about 7 3/4 miles or 7 2/3 miles, and 43 employees to take care of everything. So as somebody said earlier, it's a major department with a major budget and major responsibilities. And we do our best to try to keep Cheshire on that Money Magazine list of best places to live and work. And we'll that's always our goal, to do our part to keep the infrastructure in a place where folks want to be here and spend many years of their lives. Next slide. So this is just a quick overview of the department, which many of you have seen in the budget book probably. so I won't belabor it. But the public works side is about a 4.02% increase at this point. The public properties is going down by about 2/3%, and the water pollution control department's going down by about 1 1/3%. So just kind of gives you the broad scope, and we'll obviously delve into some detail here. We can go on to the next slide. And at this point, I will turn it over to Mr. Hallier, who is our superintendent of our water pollution control department, and he can go into whatever detail he deems, and then I'm sure he'll love to take questions from the council on anything you wish to hear about.
And just for the record, in the detail book, page 133 is the beginning of the WPCD budget for those following along in the detail book. All right, take it away, Scott.
Oh, well, as you can see, if you look through the budget book, the budget pretty much is fairly stable with just cost of increases, cost of living increases with most of our things. There is one area in there which was it looks like a large increase. It's not. It's in our parts and our programs for our pumps. We need to replace some of the VFDs, the drives that actually control our pumps. And we had one go, and so I've allocated money in there. The one that went unexpectedly, so I put some extra money in there to go through them and have them replaced. If one goes, eventually the rest of them are going to go too. Other than that, there's not a lot that has changed in the budget. I don't know if you guys have any questions or.
Are there, I actually do have a couple of questions.
Okay.
If I could.
Sure.
We had there's actually a significant $100,000 increase in the personnel services. And if we could just elaborate as I'm trying to figure out where that's from. Is it an additional person? Oh, no, you know what? I'm sorry. I'm not on page 133. I'm on page 131. You're right.
I didn't see any increase in personnel.
Yeah, no, that's we'll
It
get
scared
back to
me.
that.
Yeah, that's going to be a George question.
Yes, it is in a little while. So,
George, you can start working on the answer to that one now. Then.
Yeah, you got a preview.
Motion to adjourn.
No, are there questions of the sewer water pollution control fund?
I think Mr. Walsh has one, Mr. Barry.
Oh, sorry, I didn't.
Yeah, hi.
Councilman
Sorry.
Walsh, thank you.
Just a quick question, Scott. The pump replacements that you said, what's the lifetime of those that normally average?
Approximately 15 years.
Okay. And how old are the ones that you just replaced?
We replaced one. It was 19 years old.
Okay.
And it was unexpected. So they're being all the same age, I'm expecting eventual failures with the other ones.
So the average lifespan is 15 years, but at 19 years, it was unexpected?
I shouldn't say unexpected. Everything was running fine, and then it basically died.
Okay. Now I'm just trying to figure, in 10 years or 15 years, we should start thinking, okay, well, this is going to be happening. It's like normal routine maintenance of some of those parts that, I don't know if that's a feasible thing to start thinking about, before they start breaking like that. And
you are correct. And we haven't had an issue previously. And obviously the past 2 years, we've been trying to keep the budget increases as minimal as we can.
No, I'm fine with that. Yeah.
And now we've seen a failure like this. And that's why I'm trying to be a little more proactive and say, okay, we need to get a little more money to kind of do this.
Well, obviously you guys must take pretty good care of them if you got 4 more years out of the normal lifespan. So that I appreciate that you guys are on top of the maintenance on that part of it. So that's something that I'd like to see, that we, I always like when we get more than the lifespan out of it. So thank you for doing that. But that's all I had for tonight. Thanks.
Thank you.
Now that I'm on the right page, I actually have a question as well. Are we seeing more of an increase in usage and more expenses involved with more people being at home as opposed to working in offices?
We have seen an increase in the flow, roughly about 1 million gallons per day. More than it's gone down since probably November, December. But when this whole thing first started, especially over the summer, our summer flows were averaging about 1 million gallons a day more than usual. So I had talked to other treatment plants, and they were experiencing the same type of thing. Fortunately, we're sized enough that we're handling it okay. Obviously, we're putting a little more strain on the equipment, but we're doing okay with it.
And has there been a significant increase in expense, power, disposal, those types of things?
Obviously, there's going to be an increase with power, but we have a current contract that we're locked in with the power company, and so that hasn't gone up yet. Eventually, I'm sure it's going to catch up with us at some point, but right now we're okay with it.
Okay, that's good to know we're handling that.
Yes.
Any other council members with questions? Seeing none, all right. Well, Mr. Hellier, you're off the hook for a little while, but we got to go back to Mr. Nowotny now.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Sure. Well, good evening again. I figured we'd start with a little overview of the entire department. So this is the Public Works Department minus Scott's piece. Is broken down into a number of divisions. So we have administration, engineering, highway, sidewalks and drainage, snow and ice, trees, solid waste, grounds. And then there's an entirely separate budget for public properties, but I just kind of rolled it up in here because it falls under my purview. And as you can see on the far right column, the percent changes are indicative of obviously where the budget's going. And as you notice, from a quick scan of the solid waste and grounds, obviously have the largest increase. And while I'll take you through the entire budget, those are the two areas I'll be keying on, and I'll try to give you some insight into what we're seeing in both those cases. So if we move off the slides at this point, I think I'll be happy to kind of walk you through each one of these individually. So if you start on page 119 in the horizontal book, that's our administration division, which is myself and a lot of the folks in the office. And probably the largest thing to point out here, which is fairly common through the budget, and I'm sure fairly common through the entire town budget, is the line 5107, which is a salary adjustment line, which has a two-year salary adjustment built into the 1 year. So that obviously went up by 550%. So that's there. That is the reason for that. Everything else in the budget is fairly status quo. So if there's any questions on administration, I'll be happy to take them.
George, I had a question on that, and it goes to the capital project manager. Now, we didn't actually, we don't really have one of those yet, right? This is sort of a envisioned person. I know it's in both budgets, but is that a fact?
We do have
somebody.
Yep. We last July, that position was authorized. So we Dan Bombero, who was the former assistant town engineer, moved into that position.
Fine.
And,
So it was sort of a reclassification. I apologize for that.
Correct.
So, okay. And we're splitting that with Board of Ed.
With Board of Ed, yep. And they have filled his plate with a lot of projects, so they're getting their money's worth.
I apologize for that segue into forgetfulness. Okay, thank you.
Not a problem.
Mr. Gulliver?
George, how is my question goes to the having the town engineer. Obviously, we don't have a specific town engineer. Who we're using contract services, correct, for a town engineer. How has that been working out? Has that been saving money? Has that been a good transition? Are they so far? Have you found that they've been a good overseer of the projects? Are we getting good quality service and good representation for these projects and what we're needing from a town engineer?
We're certainly getting good service, and if I can just push that back for 5 minutes, I'll be happy. I've got a whole slide on that, and I'll be happy to give you a little more insight into it.
Okay, thank you. I look forward.
Any more questions on administration? I don't see any other hands, so I guess we're ready to go on to what I'm assuming is engineering is next.
Correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Veliber teed this up very nicely, so.
Yeah.
So that on page 121 starts engineering and inspection, which is one of our large divisions. And in this case, I have as we go into 5102, you'll note that there's our engineering operations manager is going down to 0, and we've proposed an assistant town engineer. And if Mr. Kimball puts up the next slide, I can kind of give you a little more insight into why that line is changing, although going down nicely enough. But so this is a personnel, I won't call it a reclassification, but it's a position reclassification. Don Nolte, who's been our engineering operations manager for several years and been an employee of the town for about 11 years, is retiring effective this June. So he's been a fantastic person in the end, who's worked from everything from engineering technician to up to the engineering operations manager. He's done all facets of the engineering positions in town, and been instrumental in getting many grants and supervising a number of large projects through town. So we'll definitely miss him and certainly wish him well in his retirement. But he's at that point in his career where we'd like to call it a day. And as kind of to set up a rebuilding, if you will, of the engineering division, because as you all remember, we lost our town engineer last year, Walt Gankars. Dan Bombero moved over to the engineering, the project manager position from the assistant town engineer position. So we're down to Don and our engineering technician, Mike Caffrey. Don is leaving, so we've really unwittingly kind of gutted the engineering side of the house here. So as a replacement, we've proposed hiring an assistant town engineer in place of the engineering operations manager. And again, it's kind of a rebuilding year for us. It'll give us a professional engineer on staff, which will certainly be beneficial. That's our hope, that we'll get somebody with that designation. And there is still a need for a full-time town engineer. And this kind of goes to Mr. Veliber's point earlier. And if before we switch slides, does anybody have any questions about that reorganization, if you will, before I move on to the next thing?
I don't see any hands, so you're free to move on.
Thank you. So with that, with this change, as I said, we have contracted engineering services for the town engineer, and we had budgeted about $45,000 a year for those services. This slide is kind of giving you an assessment of where we're at. And keep in mind, this is the last couple of years have been very intensive in development in town, and some other things with MS4 that have come on, and other programs that have been initiated through the state or various entities. So we're seeing a heavy use year of engineering services for sure. But we've had our contracted engineer since September of last year. So it's been 7 months in that range at this point. And again, we started off with a budget of about 45,000. Right now, we're projecting to spend about 120,000 on these services. And again, the Wpcd has been very busy. The town certainly has been busy. And that 120,000 we project will get us about 900 hours of engineering service. So as you can imagine, engineering service is very expensive by the hour, like an attorney or any other professional field. As I'm not necessarily advocating for this in this budget, but just as a kind of a metric to think about for the future, a full-time town engineer is probably going to come in about 140,000 with benefits, with figuring 30% benefits or somewhere in that range. And they're on staff for 1,820 hours full-time in that case. Plus, it would obviously be a salaried position if it ever comes to fruition. So you can expect more hours than that, I would think. But it's just giving the council an idea. We're happy to continue this for another year, which is what's in the budget now, and not upset the apple cart or anything else. But I just wanted to give you a snapshot of where we're at. We're certainly getting good service from our engineering firms. It's nothing to do with them. It's just a large volume of work that between plan reviews, as I said, MS4 type state runoff issues, and all kinds of reviews of environmental permitting that we have to do, and things of that nature to keep up with the modern regulations, as I say. So we can skip back to the group if you like, Mr. Kimball. And
Mr. Barway, can I ask a question? Dave?
Sorry, yes, sir, Mr. Orris.
Thank you, George. I guess my question is, do you think that the hours that we're expending this year with the consultant is something going to be more typical going forward? I know we've had, a lot of new economic development, and it sounds like you've got some regulatory things you've been dealing with. Clearly, you budgeted significantly less last year than what we are incurring. So I guess, so that we can kind of do a cost benefit analysis of what's that tipping point of having an on-staff individual. What do you see going forward relative to your expectation for this year's number?
That 120 is what I see at this point for this year. And then going forward, I wish I had a better crystal ball, but if development kind of moderates, I think that number will come down fairly dramatically and be kind of more in keeping where we thought we were. It might be more than the 45,000 that we had thought, but somewhere in the middle there, maybe in the 60, 70 range, something like that, which makes it less of a slam dunk for a full-time person to be on staff. But right now, there's a, as you said, Mr. Orris, there's a lot of development in town, and that's a great thing for the grand list and for in many ways of this town, the amenities that people are able to use and things. But my hope is that it's going to kind of moderate. I think we're in a little bit of a peak here, and well, I hope it doesn't for the town's for the town's benefit. I can't see it going up all the time, I guess.
So it sounds like you're making an argument for us to kind of wait and see.
I would caution that we wait and see. We can try it another year and see where it takes us, and then come back and reevaluate if you'd like.
Okay, thank you, George.
Mr. Slocum?
Yeah, in connection with Mr. Orris's question, I'm going after that support role that is played with the replacement of Mr. Nolte, for example. Obviously, he's sort of grown into a job, and his job has expanded over time. Probably his level of experience has only made that better. When he's replaced, and you're reaching out to replace him, what type of person are you getting? Are you getting someone who's not a town engineer type education per se, but they sort of meet a standard, they can really provide a support role for those consultants? What's going to go on with the new person fitting into this department? Sure,
I've got a job description on my desk that we're working through, but it would an assistant town engineer is typically somebody who there are assistant town engineers who hold that role throughout their career. So it's not necessarily somebody who has to move up to a higher position, but somebody who's got a background in land use development, because a lot of it comes down to reviewing plans with planning and zoning and wetlands and all the folks that work on those WPCA type matters. So it's kind of a land use background, engineering background, but we ideally want a credentialed engineer with a professional engineer certification or the ability to obtain one or the other. That would give us the ability in-house to sign some applications for various things or reports and endorse them in-house and take some of the load off the consultants that we're currently using for those.
Okay, that was really my question. With the transition, are we going to load up the consultants' efforts more, but not ideally in the hiring process, is what you're saying?
Yeah, correct. I think we would, if
Okay.
anything, we would see a benefit. We would see a decrease in the consultant hours. It might be marginal, but it wouldn't be more for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Talbot, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sean, first to you, just to clarify, page 121, the 5401, which is the consultant for the contractual services, that 45 is both the Public Works half, the 22.5, and the WPCA 22.5, correct?
No, so it's actually not. I'm glad you pointed that out. So the of that 45,000, 22,500 is the Public Works town side. And George and I were just reviewing this earlier back on the WPCD budget. Last year we had, when the council added and split the other 22.5, we had put it in a line, I think it was a 5409 line in that budget. And it was inadvertently left out of this budget. So we do need to add it back into this budget at 22,000 in the WPCD side in order to make it full. So I'm not sure how that was overlooked, but that one is supposed to be in the WPCD just like it was in the adopted budget for the current year.
Okay, so it should be just the 22.5 then.
No, the 45, George, you can touch on the other items. There's other items in there, soil scientists.
Okay,
geotechnical,
and
others.
it's
the other
22.5 plus that adds up to the 45.
Correct. Right. George, do I have that right?
Correct. Yeah, that's correct. The 22.5 part of it is more for reviewing plans. The stuff we did in-house with the town engineer, we still at one time had a 20,000 plus line there for stormwater reporting and soil scientists and things we're using the consultant for, but it was kind of ex parte of the town engineer at the time.
So George, staying on that line item, then the actual for fiscal year 20 was just under 18,000. I assume it was lower because part of that was work that was done by Mr. Gankars then? Is that why it's a low number?
Yeah, correct. Mr. Nolte, and who has a background in land use development, although he's not a credentialed engineer, combined with Mr. Gankars, who is a credentialed engineer, were able to offset a lot of those costs.
And then the expected expenditure for the current fiscal year then is 60K.
At that time, we correct, when we developed the budget, correct. It was 60, and
that's what you expect to spend between until June 30th of this year.
Yeah, correct. We're correct. There's the second component of this would have been in the water pollution control division side. So there'd be another component there. So we're in the 100,000 range when you combine the two. It's not showing up in the water pollution control side of things right now.
Okay. So, all right. So that is both. What can you give me a breakdown of the 60? How much of that is Public Works?
All of that 60 would be our side. We're right now, like the previous slide I showed you, we're projecting about 120 currently. So all of that 60 would be for Public Works related projects, and then there's about 20,000 for water pollution control, WPCA, Water Pollution Control Authority reviews, if you will, which is we kind of we track that separately to the other budget.
And I guess where I'm going is if we're going from 60 to 120, we're doubling that. Is any of this was any of the 60 lower because of having, Don and working on projects? I'm trying to get an idea of what is taking us from the current 60 to the 120 for the next budget year. What type of projects are you anticipating are going to be that, labor intensive for a contractor?
Sure. We've had a number of applications come in, certainly. So that's a big part of it. Part of when we lost Walter from the budget, kind of one of those things that was not quite so obvious was just how many things he was able to do in-house or sign off on in-house that didn't require a lot of background work because he knew about them. So much like going to an attorney, they kind of have to do their own research before they'll give you an opinion. They won't rely on somebody else's research, much like that for engineering. But we have all kinds of, whether it's projects like, dam reviews and certifications for Mixville Dam, say, or something of that nature, or something as minor as just kind of an opinion on an analysis of bridge-like structure, if you will, or something along those lines. We could do in-house with Mr. Gancar's talents, and we also had more hours. So we, until last July, we had 3 full-time people over there between Mr. Nolte, Mr. Bombero, and our engineering technician, and then we had Walter for 20 hours a month, but a very valuable 20 hours. So as I said, unintentionally, we've kind of gutted that department with this retirement. But even before that, we had Mr. Nolte, a consultant, and an engineering technician. So Don was handling a lot of pots and needing to rely on the consultant for a lot of routine matters, I would say.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Other council members with questions? Mr. Jinks, and then I see Mr. Walsh after that.
Thanks, Ms. Bowery. So George, the question I had is why wouldn't we, since we're down an engineering operations person, we're down an assistant town engineer, why wouldn't we go to hiring a town engineer now rather than an assistant town engineer?
We absolutely could. It's just obviously be a higher salaried position,
right,
at that point, but that's certainly a way to go as well. I think eventually we're going to need more than 2 folks over there. So I'm trying to ease into this because I understand that every dollar is precious, and I don't want
sure.
I don't want to try to commit the council to anything that they don't want to jump right into, for sure.
Yeah, well, I guess I was trying to think through. If we're probably not going to hire all 3 positions, I would assume, anytime soon. If we're sort of down all 3, it seems to me hiring at the top would perhaps be a better way to go. I assume if we had an assistant town engineer, we probably wouldn't necessarily need to rush into an operations manager, right?
I don't think we'll ever need another operations manager. I think if, subject to the council's approval someday, I think it would be a town engineer, an assistant town engineer, and an engineering technician. And that would keep the town in good stead for a lot of years going forward, I think.
Right. Okay. Okay. And I just wanted to say thank you to you and your department. You guys have obviously been operating under the difficult conditions everyone else has over the past year, and done a great job. So thank you to you and your crew.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, and I'll pass that on to the folks that deserve it.
Sure.
Mr. Wall. Thank you, Mr. Jenks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, George. Just a quick question. I saw that you have $120,000 with 895 hours. Is that? But if we hired a full-time at 140,000, it would be 1,800 and something hours. Would that be overkill? Because I mean, if we only have 895 hours at 120, I mean, I'm thinking like Mr. Orris on this one, where I mean, it would make sense just to hold off and let's wait and see. But I think, you know, I don't want to go and hire somebody at, you know, to do 1,800 and then try to find work for them. Or would you be using them in other areas?
Sure. Good question. And there's no lack of work. I can assure you that. As I said, we're a fully developed town. So the engineering division gets into everything from trees to curbing issues, to sidewalk issues, to road issues, obviously bridges. It's kind of, I don't want to say the heart and soul, but it's a very core part of the Public Works Department. So they're involved in almost everything we do in one form or another, whether it's permitting for something or seeing a project completely through to completion. So we definitely can use that. And one of the things we've learned is that there's obviously a public service connection or public response connection where having more boots on the ground, if you will, we get a lot of calls for service, and folks have to go out and look at things and assess things and get back to our residents about issues or questions they have. And again, having one person in Don doing that was kind of a little bit of a stretch, I think. Not that we're using consultants to look at trees or anything, but just that there's a lot of things that come through the engineering division that need hands-on somebody to look at or respond to questions with.
But you definitely think you can get through with what you have right now, then?
Yeah, I think we can. And you know, as Mr. Jinks said, if we want to go for a town engineer, that's obviously fine with me. Either way we cut it, I think we can assess whatever's left over and try to do it the smart way, obviously, and not. We certainly don't want to try to put too many people on the payroll. I certainly agree with that, but we certainly need one person there, whether it's an assistant or the full town engineer, one or the other.
George, cut was the appropriate word in that one. Any way we want to cut it. So thank you.
Sure.
All right, Councilman Velaber.
George, thank you. And again, I'll echo the sentiments of the other council members. You know, your department does a great job, and we really thank you for all that you do around town and the various, people don't realize how many different areas are covered by the Public Works Department. So that's great for what you do in the town, and we appreciate that. Maybe I'm missing something when it comes to this discussion of the town engineer and the assistant town engineer and our consulting engineer. And I just want to make sure I understand it. So right now you're predicting $120,000 for consulting services, correct? Continuing using the third party outside consultant engineers. But on top of that, you want to add an assistant town engineer, which I think was 40 something.
I think 80 is the.
Is it 80? Okay. So in theory, we're going to go to $200,000 for engineering services, correct? If we went with that.
I don't think it's, I think you have to offset the engineering operations manager, which is I think the best way to look at those two positions is there's an engineering operations manager that actually is above 80,000.
Right.
That 1-for-1 swap proposed in this budget is actually a savings of about $10,000, but it's one person for one person. So
okay, so we'd eliminate the operations manager. We'd have an assistant town manager do that, but we'd still continue to keep the same amount of consulting services that we currently have, the same cost approximately.
Correct. If that continues, and some of this is
assuming they continue to see the same level and volume of services and need that we've seen over the last couple of years. Would you predict that assuming the North End development picks up, would that be something that would potentially need a lot of engineering and consulting services for, or would that sort of take care of itself? Or
I think in the planning for that, you'd almost have to hire a consultant to review that regardless. That wouldn't be something we would typically do in-house. But the little I don't want to say little, but the basics I know of that project, there's a large private component of that project, which we typically wouldn't be too involved with other than trying to give our best recommendations for best practices. But I don't see that as being a tremendous drag on us, on the full-time staff. I guess it would certainly take some time, but it wouldn't be the end of the world.
Okay, I just want to see if that's something that might go into that, the use of that, the third-party consultant, and whether that may see another, even if other things slow down in town, whether that increases the amount of services that they may need. So you sort of predict that the 120 might be either a constant or a worst case scenario potentially, or I shouldn't say worst case scenario, but a high level mark, and it might be less than that, especially if things settle down.
Correct, and a lot of it depends on the development through town and everything else. And as I said, development is great. Grand list growth is fantastic, and we certainly want to service that, but it all comes at a cost, of course.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, thank you very much. I just wanted to make sure I understood, and thank you, Sean, also for that clarification on the two positions.
Thank you, Mr. Veliver. Other council members with comments? Mr. Orris.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, George. Obviously, you guys do a lot of work. The only complaint I'm going to have is this winter, you had some extra duty, a particular plow individual that I saw on my street, and he wasn't quite up to snuff. So I would ask you to look into that.
Was that me?
No, it's a joke. If he's watching, he'll know.
Okay. I think I knocked your curb off, but we'll fix it.
Yeah, no, it's just a joke. I was coming down the street one night, and the plow truck was in front of me, and I waved, and he waved, and I it wasn't a normal plow person, and the window came down, and then I saw who it was, and we laughed. And I said, boy, you don't usually do this kind of stuff, so you probably know what I'm talking about. I'm just teasing him, to be honest with you. But it was all
Probably
good. You guys do a phenomenal job across the board, George. You guys are very professional, and I know you lead the charge there. And the other thing I do know is I travel this state a lot, like a lot of people do, in bad weather. And I can tell you, Cheshire is the gold standard when it comes to snow removal as far as I'm concerned. I've always felt like when you get into Cheshire, our roads are excellent, they're safe, and they're better than most. So I want to commend you for that, because that's really important. So thank you for the hard work you and all of your department does.
Well, thanks. And I'll just return the compliment to the council, because you give us excellent equipment to do the work, and you allow us to pave many of these roads and keep them in good shape where they react well to our anti-icing treatments. And so it's a kind of a one hand washes the other, if you will. You folks give us the tools to do the job, and I'm glad we hold up our side of it.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because while we're talking about tools, it gets to my next question. I'm just curious. It's a tight year. We're not sure we can afford 2 dump trucks. We talked about a couple of mopeds. How well do they accept plows?
We can make it work. We have a great fleet manager who unfortunately is retiring this year probably, but he thinks he can make it work.
Sorry, I know everyone's probably saying, Rob, will you move on? But in this day and age, we got to have a little levity. But here's my serious question, George. Is there another Walt Gancars out there? We're talking about how we got a lot of benefits from Walt. He had retired from his other job. He's a PE, so he had the stamp and the credentials. Might it be worth looking for someone in a similar situation? And is that something you've considered?
Absolutely. That's been a discussion we've had, certainly. And I appreciate you bringing that up. And that would be fine too. If we could find somebody who's might do even as Walt did, a 4-day week or something to kind of keep the costs under control. But again, it's and certainly I think they're out there. We could find the right fit for Cheshire. That would be perfect, of course. But it will work best if we have 3 folks over there eventually. I'm not trying to take too big a bite of the apple, but we need to start with 1 and then see how we do. But just from the grant issues and things we've done in the past, I have a spreadsheet here that I won't put up to the screen, but I know Walt shared it with you last year. There's been many millions of dollars of grants that have been gotten through the engineering department, and those all, if you consider it, they kind of offset folks' salaries in that division. and certainly the council is wise to apply for these grants, but many times they need to be kind of ferreted out, and we need to get have time to review them and develop plans and applications and everything, and that all takes man hours, unfortunately. So the more, I don't want to say the more folks we have to do that, but we need a certain number of hours to do that and get those grants to kind of give Cheshire a head start in paying for some of these projects. And we're happy to do it, but we just need the time to be able to pull it together.
Well, thank you. I know Walt worked out really well. He was a gem for us, and there may be someone else out there in a very similar situation that is looking to slow down, not looking to fully retire, looking to give some hours, but have a little more flexibility. And there's really a win-win scenario for them and for the community. So, I'm glad you're looking into that. A couple of technical questions on 50, I think it's 5104, temporary part-time. This increase is the reinstatement of summer help. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I can, if it's okay, I can jump to that as we go, or that's our next division, highway, sidewalks, and drainage.
Yeah, absolutely, George. Sorry.
Sure. But
Yep,
but I'll that was one of the first things I was going to do. So I'll answer your question. But yes, that's correct. Last year, because of COVID, obviously, we cut 50% of the that budget for the temporary laborers, or we call them summer help kids. And this is just to restore that line to its previous amount in the previous year. And then if it's all right, Mr. Borway, I'll continue on highway, sidewalks, and drainage.
Mr. Orish, you're all set?
I have other questions, but they're more general in nature. So would you rather have me wait until George is done?
That's up to you. George,
George, you want to keep going?
Sure, that's fine.
Yeah, I'll wait.
Okay. All right. So then, George, we'll go into the next section. But one thing that the mayor brought up, though, that I want to make sure that we think about is that the infrastructure that's potentially going to be funded in some ways, bridges and some things that we have here in Cheshire that may or may not, pass Congress and be available, should be something we should be thinking about. And you touched on it when you said that the engineering department is looking for grants and things, and there may very well be some money that's available, and we want to make sure that we're ready for that. So keep that in mind as well.
If I could just touch on that, something we didn't talk about the other night with the economic development coordinator position is if you look, I'm also proposing that's an economic development coordinator and grant writer. So somebody who wouldn't be able to do all the technical work for a public works, maybe grant application, but might be able to help with coordinating, applying for, seeking out those kind of grant opportunities, not only for public works, but for human services with mental health grants and a variety of other grants in town. So that's something that the job description is being proposed to be amended to have at least a grant kind of centralized coordinating function, again, in this office here in the town manager's office, so that hopefully we can, and especially with this federal funding coming through, it's going to be, I think, more important than ever. So it won't completely allay a lot of the work that Public Works did, but even George and I have talked about hopefully some of that coordinating and seeking out can be done through my office with this new position. Thank you.
Good. All right. Thank you. All right. So George, then I guess we'll get on to the road, highways, sidewalks, and drainage. Is that the next section?
That's the next section. That's on page 123. If anybody's following along in the hymn book here. I'll just point out that this is probably our biggest chunk of the single chunk of the budget, and this is where all our maintainers and mechanics and crew leaders and a lot of the folks are paid out of. So it's obviously a large line. But again, starting on the top of 123, the 5102 line, we've taken or the town manager has taken an adjustment. We've recently settled the public works contract, which thank you to the town council for approving it. And as part of that, there's a retirement incentive. So we're expecting potentially 12 retirements over the next 4 years, up to 12 retirements through that over the next 4 years. So that should result in reductions in that line through hiring younger folks at a lower, I should say younger in experience or or new to the town folks in with a lower salary. So right now it's a $30,000 deduction assumed based on what we see for retirements. 5107 again at the bottom, near the bottom of the page. Again, that's a two-year salary adjustment in 1 year. And I'll just highlight a few of the others here. 5203, that's our auto and equipment supplies. As some of our fleet gets older and things, we just try to capture some more money for all types of regular repairs to that. Interestingly enough, 5208, which is kind of in the middle of page 124, gas and diesel, we locked in at a good point in the contract, and thanks to Mr. Jascott for his help in this, and our town manager, we locked in gas and diesel are kind of one's on a calendar year and one's on kind of a fiscal year, but we're teed up very well. We're still in the dollar something per gallon, high $1 per gallon for those, even though, as most people see, the price at the pump has gone up pretty substantially this in the past, well, several months anyway, certainly. So that's actually dropping based on our kind of, I don't want to call it a long-term contract, but our locked-in price for some months. Our consultants, 5401. This is some of our stormwater testing and things that we're using town engineer contracted services for. In truth, we'd be using contracted services in this regardless in many ways, because it's a specialty item. It's if we had somebody on staff for this type of work, they wouldn't necessarily be an environmental engineer or what you need for that. So that and this reflects again MS4 costs that the state has kind of pushed down to the towns because we have to comply with more stringent runoff and testing protocols. 5402, our construction line item. This is kind of the money that's not spoken for in anything specific. It's mainly for issues as they come up. It's been cut pretty steadily over the years. And it's down to 210,000 this year for the recommended amount. Several years ago, it was up over 300,000, and we're happy to push it down. And the good news is we have the road paving capital project each year that we can kind of draw from, and this works hand in hand with that many times for either buying basin parts or whatever. But in this construction line, we typically use it if we need to fill a sinkhole in a road or a large pothole or do some kind of basin work on an off a road that's not planned to be repaved, things like that. So there's a myriad of uses for that money, but it has been shrinking steadily over time. If we go down to page 125,
Mr. Barrow, before we move on, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So to that point, George, you're kind of suggesting that we're beating up this line item over the years, but we allocated or appropriated 230,000 last year, and you used 200,000. Why didn't you use all $30,000 if we've been pushing that budget down so much?
We try to be fiscally conservative, so we only want to use what we can. As I said, we're able to use in previous times. This line would be used for some of the paving work in town, but the council's been had very good forethought to budget each year for that capital paving project. So we try to keep this money for just emergencies, if you will, and we don't try to just expend it every year to artificially inflate anything, which I know nobody would expect us to do that, but we certainly don't. We try to just use it for things as they come up, and if there's some left over at the end of the year, that's fantastic. We're happy to give it back.
And I appreciate that, because I don't want the public to assume that we're underfunding a line item here. We've been very judicious as this council has worked really hard with the economic times to do more with less. And it's obviously this line item has gone down, but we haven't sacrificed the quality of the services and our physical plant, et cetera. at the same time. And I think that's important. I don't want someone to think we're just beating up a budget to be cheap. We're finding better ways to do things, and, you know, we're saving money where we can. And that's what this council is all about, doing as much as we can with the tax dollars that are given us. And this line item may be one of those scenarios. So thank you for clarifying that.
Mr. Talbot.
And, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, sorry,
Thank you.
George.
Just, George, off the same line as Mr. Orris's question, just above that in 5204, the program materials, or in 20, the actual was 30,000, and then we appropriated 110, and from that 110, you spent 70. So I guess what, and I don't want to put words into Mr. Orris's mouth, but what I'd like to do is budget according to, you know, what we're going to spend, and not, you know, not come up with a higher number. It's great that you're giving back and that you're being prudent with it, but I'd like to try to, you know, to base it something on, you know, what the run rate has been. So we were at 30, we were at 70, and we're still budgeting in an additional $30,000 over that. Is that a line item that we could take a look at as a possibility to get something out of? Or do you anticipate that, you know, that 100,000 is going to be exactly what you need?
I'd rather keep it up there just because it's again, one of those kind of unknown things that this is for a lot of times gravel or asphalt or different things materials that we use for other than programmed road construction, I would call it. So occasionally we have basins or pipes or something that wears out. And as same answer I gave to Mr. Orris, we try to be very judicious with it. I have a rollout of the past several years, and it's been in the $40,000-$50,000 range in several years before that. But unfortunately, we never know, because it's kind of unforeseen circumstances. It's hard to pin it down to an exact number. But I certainly understand your point of wanting to be realistic with it. That's for sure.
Is this a case too, George, where those materials have increased over the years in our cost? The cost of pipe and gravel and stone and asphalt patches, the cost of those materials gone up substantially, like we've seen some building materials rise, for example?
It has gone up for sure, but not, I don't think to the extent of like lumber, which has jumped a tremendous amount in recent months, or last year anyway. So we don't have that. Asphalt certainly has gone up, and will continue to go up as it kind of tracks petroleum, because there's a lot of oil in asphalt. So we kind of keep it there. As I said, we've tried in the last number of years to use that capital account for the road repaving where we can, to take some of the heat off of these budgets. And if it's going to be, we try to buy basin tops and everything, or whatever we do out of that capital account, just to keep the numbers like for like. And that's why you see some reduction here. I think in years past, sometimes we bought more out of these operating accounts than we did the capital, but I think that's where we're seeing kind of the dip in it at this point.
Thank
So
you, George.
I don't know if I'm giving you a good answer, but I'd rather keep it at some higher number than 50 or 60,000 if we can.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Orris?
Peter, great minds think alike. I was going to head back to that line item for the exact reason, to finish that train of thought. And but George, I think we need to look at this line item, because what I heard you say was that a number of years were even less than last year. So I didn't hear any year that was above 70,000. So, Mr. Talbot points out we had 30,000 in 2020. You mentioned a few years in the 40s. You expended 69,000 last year. I know it doesn't sound like a lot of money, but if 70,000 is our high water mark, so to speak, you know, I'm just not sure why we're carrying $100,000. But, and, you know, 30,000 here, 30,000 there makes a big difference to the taxpayers.
Sure, sure. No, and all I can say is, of course, last year was a COVID year, so we certainly, well, we didn't stop operations for sure. We didn't do probably as much as we normally would in a given year, but so it's a little bit of an aberration. But yeah, I can't argue that in the past I've got 18 was 46,000, 19 was 54,000, and then 20 was 30,000. But that's again start of COVID, kind of artificially low year at that point.
Could it also be that maybe some of your forces were deployed because of the storm? It was a significant effort on your part to clean up from the storm. Were there other items that you would have wanted to get to that you didn't get to?
We did. We've got some basins around town that have cones on them if you drive around. So some of that suffered a little bit, but I certainly can't make an argument that would have added another 30,000 to this line or anything like that.
Good. All right. Thank you. Mr. Slocum.
I think the significant comment that George made regarding how most of this shortfall goes through the capital process. So the bottom line is your spending is just maybe switched over to there. And that's why I probably could be comforted by reducing that line, because you're going to slip it into capital. Now, if we beat you up on capital, that's another issue. But again, I think it also helps us frame that issue. You know, that maybe some of the stuff the crews might have done is going to end up on the other side. And I don't know if the crews do on that side what you're talking about also, or if we hire most of that out. I mean, you could better explain that than me, but I think a lot of it's just slipped over the capital side, right, George?
Yeah, there's certainly we've pushed a lot of it into the capital, and our crews do many of the basin, the majority of the basin work in town before we pave or anything. We do a lot of prep for if we're going to replace sections of curbing. We do that in-house a lot of times.
But it's in-house, yeah, on the capital budget side. That's the bottom line.
Correct, and
right,
correct. A lot of it gets funneled through there.
Right,
sure.
Right. I think we can reduce that line, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, Mr. Talbot.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess, Sean, that gets to kind of a philosophical question then, as to whether we want to be incurring the debt towards that and paying that over the 20 years, or do we want to be, tackling that in operating, since we've been low every year in that. So, what's the better way to deal with some of those issues? Should we be doing, the basins out of operating and not doing them out of capital as part of a project or whatever, so that's,
it's really
your cable. Peter, we're not bonding everything in the capital projects though. So I would imagine the stuff that we don't think has long useful life. We've talked about that as a council, that, if you got a useful life of 5 years on whatever you're running through capital, you shouldn't be bonding it for 20 years. And I think that's your point. So I'm imagining that the stuff that isn't matched properly from a useful life / bonding perspective, if we do in a capital budget, we're going to do through CNR, correct?
Yeah, but I think if you're touching on, say, catch basins, for instance, that might have been funded out of this line, they're going to have a useful life that would be supported in a capital appropriation anyway. So yeah, it's really a philosophical. I mean, every town struggles with the same thing. Some towns bond roads, some pay roads out of the operating budget. It's always it's a challenge to find that balance. And I think the town of Cheshire's done a really good job with this over the years. So. But I think what you're hitting on with this, and this is actually also one of the reasons that, I prefer bringing forward a capital budget at the same time as the operating budget, so that we can have these kind of trade-off discussions. If you'll recall, we did this with tree removals as well. We've done kind of one-time tree removal discussions, capital efforts, and pulled it out of the operating budget. Of course, we've had so many tree issues, recently. You could certainly argue that should be an operating budget because we do it every single year. So it's sort of It is really, I think you said philosophical, Peter, that both are defensible. Bond counsel is fine with both of them. It's really which pot of money is the most judicious for operating and the pressures on the mill rate and the taxpayer versus spreading those costs out over multiple years. So.
Thank you.
Moving right along. We can continue to move along if you like.
Yes, please.
Okay. On 125, I'll just point this out. 5409. This is the favorite line I know of myself and the council, but the top of that is water main service through Regional Water, who obviously provides all our public water service to town, and they do a great job keeping the mains watertight. But we're projected to pay $757,000 and change this year that's for the use of the water, the use of the main and the water in the main, and that's done on a inch-foot calculation by Regional Water. So it's a kind of a annual fee, if you will. And that we increased that from last year. I don't have a number, and I know Mr. Borroway and Mr. Slocum are both more in tune with Regional Water than certainly we are. But at the point of the budget, they hadn't published an increase for the coming year. So that's one thing we try to continuously check on, but I haven't had an update on that one yet.
Well, there's not a planned application to the Representative Policy Board for an increase until at least next year.
Okay.
We have some time.
Sure. And the other thing I'll point out in there, it's a laundry list of things, but probably when you heard from the fire department the other day, Mr. Kimball's slotted much of the hydrant work over to the fire department budget. So this line looks like a little bit of a decrease, like a 1.16% decrease. But there are increases in there, obviously, for the regional water charge and some other things.
No, all right. Keep moving.
Sure. That concludes highway, sidewalks, and drainage, unless anybody has anything. Snow and ice is the next one on page 127. Not a lot to say there other than this year we're still tracking slightly under budget, which is a good thing. Again, the only thing I'll point out is 5208 gas and diesel. That's a little bit of a decrease based on some of the contract pricing we have in place, which is benefiting us in the year going forward here. And if there's no questions in snow and ice, I'll move on to trees.
Yes, Mr. Walsh. Oh, you're still on mute, sir.
There you go. Sorry about that. I guess there was a misconception following one of our meetings in which it was reported that we were over budget in snow and ice. Can you explain that so people understand that we really weren't over budget? I think a lot of people were worried. Oh wow, there goes the public works going over budget again. So I just want you to make sure that you explain that again so people understand.
Sure. I'll say right now we're tracking slightly under budget for the total. We're still closing out some POs for salt. We write large POs obviously for materials, salt, or gas and diesel usage and things like that. So it's April 1st. Our snow season ended today, if you will, or yesterday, March 31st. So we're closing out. But right now we're looking like we're under budget, and I hesitate to say, but it might be by $15,000 or somewhere in that range. But yeah, there was an article written earlier, as Mr. Walsh alluded to, and that our overtime budget is likely going to be slightly over budgeted, but overall the snow and ice budget in total will be slightly under budget. So as with many budgets, sometimes you go over in one area and you're able to recoup the overage in another by being under budget. So that's where we are. we've had a good run. I'm going to jinx us, but we've had a good run for the last few years where we've been under budget in snow and ice. Even though this year was a pretty good snow year, there was one major snowstorm in December, January, and February of a foot or more, which is a pretty good storm for us. But we're, knock on wood, we're going to be under, and we've been under the last couple of years.
And really the reason for the overtime was because one or two of the storms were very long storms that lasted 24 hours. So you're doing that. So overall, I mean, I just want the public to understand that you know, you didn't go over budget, and I think you guys did a heck of a job keeping to that, because this was a busy snow year, as well as you guys. I just want to commend everybody for what you guys did after Storm Isis back in the fall, where you guys did the brush removal and you did it. You kept the public up to date on where you were in terms of picking it up, and I really appreciate what you did, because I think it made the public know where when they had to put their brush out, where you were, and you cleaned it all up in less time than you had predicted. So I want to thank you for doing all that too as well. Thank you.
Sure. Well, thank you, and I'll pass that on to the crew who did all the hard work. Interestingly, that you bring it up, we're just finishing grinding of that brush, which was like Quinnipiac Park is now clean of brush. It was ground up the other day, and we're grinding what's left at the Public Works garage. So I owe the council kind of an update on that 180,000 that you allocated for that pickup. And in the next couple of weeks, I'll get you the final numbers now that we have the grinding done and FEMA has approved and everything. And if I can, I'll just bring up one point that kind of brings us back to that construction item in highway, sidewalks, and drainage. In poor snow years, which we've unfortunately had a lot of in my tenure here, I must be like a Jonah, but we've had some years where we've gone markedly over the snow and ice budget. That construction line item being a little higher has kind of offset those increases has offset those overages in the Public Works budget. So we haven't a lot of times had to come back to the council to do any kind of budget expansion, if you will, by overfunding the Public Works Department to cover those costs. We've been able to absorb it within the budget by kind of being judicious. So it's one of the benefits of having a little larger construction line. But again, I understand every dollar is precious, and we want to get it as close as we can.
But I would also say to that point that if we had a tough winter, I think it would be understandable if you were to need to come back and say, hey, gee, we had a lot of storms. It was unusual, because people will know that and they'll see that. They'll be having shoveled their own driveways more times than they wanted to as well. So, or paying somebody to plow it.
Sure.
All right. Mr. Orris?
Yes, thank you. And George, one more issue. You guys deserve a lot of credit for what you did in a tough winter during the pandemic. And, you know, I know you're dealing with personnel issues in light of the pandemic. And once again, Cheshire always does what it does. It rises to the occasion. I know you had other departments who jumped in, and that's what I was kind of alluding to earlier. You know, there was another individual from a certain department that was in that truck, and we were laughing because I'm used to seeing him in another vehicle, and all of a sudden he was in a plow truck. And but my point is, you had police, you had fire, and you had other departments that jumped into plow trucks to assist. And, you know, we talk about what a great community is. Granted, they get paid. I understand that. But they don't have to do it. They could have stayed home and said, you know what, we're not interested. We don't need the extra work. But they didn't do that. They all rose to the occasion. They got in the trucks when they needed to, and the work got done. So thank you to all of those outside of Public Works that jumped in as well.
I couldn't say it better, and thanks for bringing that up, Chairman Orris. That's a great point that should be raised for sure.
All right. Other questions on? Oh, Mr. Slocum.
Thank you. You know, this is not a question on the snow, but I wanted to go back to a point that I believe Sean made last year, which is kind of interesting about the Regional Water Authority pilot. It's roughly projected to be $689,000. It doesn't offset the budget, so to speak, in Public Works, but it's almost a $68,000 net cost to the town after we get the pilot money versus what we pay for the water. Now, I know that doesn't impact George's budget directly, but it's an interesting connection with cost and revenue for a service
Right.
that I thought we could be reminded of. I know we pay for hydrants too. That's different. And that's added to that. But I just I was interested by that point when the town manager made that point last year, and I double checked it just now. So that's about what the difference is.
Yeah, they're
So-
pretty close to the same. They're in the same ballpark. And in fact, I think I was just looking back at my notes, George. I think we planned for a potential 3% increase in that line. I know not to go back to the water. So,
That's what I based. That's what I based that increase on. That $68,000.
but for this budget, if there doesn't end up being an RWA increase, that there may be about a 3% reduction we can put in that one, like around $20,000, I think, unless I have that wrong.
That's correct. And it depends on when it comes in. Some years it's come in at the start of our fiscal year. Other years it's kind of a calendar year thing. So we just want to be sure the next 15 months that it's there's nothing coming down the line.
Got it.
Right. Thanks for that.
Sure. And if you'd like to put that pilot in our budget, I won't object. So,
No. It was just,
Doesn't work that way.
it's the curious ways revenues, offset expenses. That's all.
So moving right along to trees, which will be very quick. This has been largely zeroed out except for $1,700 total for kind of some advertising and tree warden licensing and things of that nature. So most of this, as Mr. Kimball said earlier, is done out of a capital appropriation that the council grants us every other year or every third year, something like that. So we're happy to do the work out of there. And as Mr. Kimball said, there's plenty of tree work in town. We've Don Nolte, who again is our engineering operations manager. He's been fantastic in getting ahead of this emerald ash borer situation. So we haven't seen a tremendous amount of dead ash trees on the road, and every other tree. He's the anti-Lorax in many ways. He kind of takes care of trees before they become problems for us. And unless there's any question on trees, we'll move on to solid waste.
Mr. Veliver?
Mr. Veliver.
Yep. Question for you on trees. Two things. One, is there, and I know that there have been some projects that have you use third parties. Are you usually use third party tree providers to do some of that tree work? Is that part of the budget, hiring? Because I know obviously some of this stuff they have to get up in bucket trucks and other stuff like that. And is that something you normally would hire a third party tree company to do?
Yes, very much. That's specialty work. And many times these trees aren't, if a tree is kind of in the middle of nowhere, if you will, we have folks who can take them down. That's not a problem. But most of the time, especially along streets, they're in proximity to power lines or houses or something that can create a hazardous situation. So we almost always use contractors for those types of trees because it's a little bit out of our wheelhouse.
And then as a follow-up question, when those trees are cut down, what ultimately happens to them? Does the third party take them? Does the town take them? And I guess the question is, when you mentioned the thing about, bugs, whether it's emerald ash borers or whatever, bugs, is there any rules about where those trees can be transported once they're cut down?
We try to keep them in town to the extent possible. Although the emerald ash borer is throughout the state at this point, so it's not a concern, as much of a concern as it was half a dozen years ago when it was kind of a new development. But they generally either go to our yard and we either cut them up or have them ground at some point, or we have several local vendors who will take them and either, I suppose, turn them into firewood or whatever they do with them.
Gotcha. So, but as long as they stay in town, there's no restriction on that. But can they go out of town? Can they go to it? That would be,
Yes.
so, okay.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
They can go virtually throughout the state at this point.
Throughout the state. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Sure. If no other tree questions, we'll move on to solid waste.
Yes.
This budget has some changes in it, and this is one of the ones I highlighted earlier that sees a larger percentage increase. 5409 on page 129 is the bulk of the funds in this budget. and I'll take you through it. There's several areas where it's shown some increase. The second line down, household hazardous waste in that budget item, we've got for 37,000. Last year, I know the council had a debate, a little bit of a debate about whether to stay with our COG program or move to the RWA Hasway Central, and it was determined to move to the Hasway Central. That was projected to be about 30,000. Unfortunately, well, I don't want to say unfortunately, but the fact is with COVID, it seems like folks made great use of the hazardous waste disposal program, which is a great thing for keeping that out of the waterways and anywhere else, but it did come at a cost. So we're projecting a little higher cost, and we get these numbers from Hasway Central, and next year they're projecting us to need about 37,000 to meet our obligation under that program. But the good news is it's based on car count, so folks are using the program, and that's what's driving the cost up. So certainly Cheshire is very very much into getting these things out of the waste stream. And then as we go down about a third of the way down, you'll see the tipping fee. That's a market increase, and I had projected about 8,500 tons of trash this year. Mr. Kimball, in consultation with kind of looking a little more forward than I was at our trends, took it down to 8,200 at this point. Normally, we're in the 7,000 to 7,100 ton range of trash, so it's a market increase. And we certainly seem to think a lot of it's COVID related because folks have been staying home and disposing of their trash at home as opposed to at work or out at sporting events or things that they would have normally done. But we have to assume, I don't want to say the worst case, but we have to assume that some of that's going to continue next year and budget appropriately, unless the council wants to kind of skinny that back and then true it up at the end of next year and see where that goes. But that's a large increase from last year. And the last thing I'll bring up is additional recycling containers, which is fourth one from the bottom. Is at 11,000. That's about a $6,000 or $5,000 increase from last year. The good news is we have folks that are requesting additional recycling containers left and right. And it seems like every time somebody puts out a post on the forum that says, hey, the town will give you a free one, just give them a call. We get a ton of calls, which is a good problem to have because it means a lot more stuff's going in the recycling stream than in the trash stream. So it's a good problem, but it does cost some money to renew our stock of recycling containers. So those are some of the larger increases that we've seen this year, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Veliver?
Yeah, George, thank you. And thank you for bringing that up. I know one of the things that had been a concern, and maybe hopefully it's been resolved, it was, the concern now with more trash, with only the one container. Have you found any, and we had some cross contamination with, trash and recycling. Have you seen that there's any increase in that? Is that getting better? And I guess my concern, of course, is as people are asking for these recycling containers, are they ultimately potentially using them as for recycling, or is there sort of is this becoming an alternative garbage can for some of these people?
Good question. And we did have a glut of kind of cross contamination, as you said early on in the program, but that seems to have moderated quite a bit. And we're not hearing from the hauler that that's as big an issue. So I think folks are really strictly adhering to the different containers for the right uses. And don't tell anybody, but we will tend to give away even more than one recycling container if somebody needs it. If a family of 6 is in a house and they want 2 recycling containers, we generally try to give that out because it's good policy and keeps things out of the waste stream for sure.
Well, it's good to know because I was concerned about that, and especially if you see that increase, that I just want to make sure with the increase in the amount of trash you're seeing, that we're not seeing an increase in the amount of cross contamination as well, especially if they run out of space. All of a sudden they're like, wait, we never needed this much. We never had this much trash before. But this would be a great place to put it. So I'm glad to see that recycling containers are in fact being used. Not only are they being asked for, but they're being used properly. So that's good to know. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you. George, I'd like to bring up a topic that certainly is optional, but going along with the fact that people are spending more time at home, and you certainly hear about the home improvement stores, furniture stores, all doing very well. And I don't need an answer tonight, but sometime in the budget deliberations, what would it cost to do a one-time bulky waste pickup? Again, that's a one-time thing. I would just like to know what the cost is. If we're finding more in the recycling, because people are home more, we're finding more use of the sewer, we're finding more use in the water as well. I'm wondering if that might be something that we might need to consider as well. So just again, I didn't ask you ahead of time, so I'm sorry. So if we can just have a number sometime in the budget deliberations, your best estimate of what it might cost, unless you know already.
Sure. I can give you that. Actually, I'm all about trash, it seems like lately. But the last go around, I'll give you a round number. The last go around for bulky waste was 290,000, give or take a couple thousand. And that included the fee. There's it's about half and half. There's a fee for the contractor to go around town and do the collection. We'd have to negotiate that, I think, with the collection company, or we'd have to verify their number, certainly, that they've used in the past. And then about half of that was for the tipping fee. The interesting part is, as I'm sure the council recalls, I think we went 4 or 5 years without a collection last time. So the tonnage was fairly significant. And that may come down a little bit. So that number could certainly drop slightly as well.
Okay. Something to keep in mind if we want to address an issue. All right, Mr. Slocum?
Just to sort of piggyback on what you were saying, I don't know if it's practical or even worthy of consideration, but if we put it on a more programmatic basis and actually plan for it every budget year, like building a bank, I don't know if that it's below referendum level. It's not as if it would be breaking any rules on that, if I'm not correct, John, right? Maybe that's a way we could do it and keep it on a cycle. And I think we can talk about that at another time. It's part of a larger conversation, but maybe that's something we could look at.
Sure. And we've looked at that in the past, just kind of planning with Mr. Kimball a little bit and solid waste folks. But one of the ideas too is you could almost do it by trash route per year. So you'd have a much smaller dollar figure at that point and kind of work your way around town every 5 years, somebody would get the service essentially. And there's many other ways to do it on a kind of a scheduled system where folks call in and on a certain day of a week or something, they have their house picked up. But as you said, I won't belabor it, but there are many ways to skin the cat.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
No other issues?
Unless there's any solid waste issues.
No. Oh, Ms. Pavano?
Yeah, we discussed on one of our council meetings that some of the transfer stations are going to be closing. Do you anticipate any increases in our fees?
That's a good point. Thanks for bringing that up. And thanks a lot, because I skipped over that on my notes. I know the council's aware that the Wallingford transfer station were essentially out of that location at this point because of contractual issues. So about a year ago, we moved over to a transfer station in Waterbury, a private transfer station that we're paying $88 a ton to, which is why last year the tipping fee went up a fairly significant amount, and it continued to rise for more tonnage this year more than anything. But we're paying $88 a ton there. We're looking at into a kind of a more long-term agreement that I know Mr. Kimball is going to, and myself have been looking at with the solid waste with the town attorney, and certainly the solid waste committee will be involved in that, and the council in general. But we're trying to kind of get some terms for the council to consider at that point. But they are closing, as you said, and the Mira site up in Hartford is going to become a transfer station in the near term future, and then its situation beyond 2022, 23 is a little murky. So we definitely want to find a home for our trash before that becomes a huge issue.
Thank you.
All right. Other questions or comments? All right, then I guess the next seeing hands.
Sure. The next one is grounds.
Yeah.
And coming down the home stretch, that's another one that went up dramatically. And I think Mr. Kimball has a slide for this one in our personnel services part of it, which is going to be 5102 on page 131. You can see that goes up by about 23%. And I'll give you a little more insight into that. So in the budget, we did request an additional groundskeeper. We currently have 4 full-time groundskeepers on staff, and we use anywhere from around a dozen summer help temporary laborers in the bulk of the summer to try to kind of keep the fields in shape for the spring, summer, and fall sports. We found that as everybody knows, we had a changeover from where the groundskeepers came under the Public Works operations about 3.5 years ago. And we've been trying to work out some of the kinks in those couple of years to get the best use out of our folks. And we've swung Public Works maintainers into the parks at times and the open space to try to take the load off at certain times of the year. And we've found that unfortunately the need for groundskeepers and maintainers kind of coincides at the same time during the year, where on the highway side, the maintainers will be redoing catch basins, roadside mowing, sweeping, vectoring, sidewalk work, all the things we do on the highways. At those same times, generally in the spring and early summer, the groundskeepers are fully involved in the field maintenance, lining, mowing, fertilizing, all the things they do, plus the town buildings and the parklets and everything else. So we have been successful in swinging some maintainers into the groundskeeper side, but not, we haven't had an abundance of personnel to kind of move back and forth. In addition to that, there's some reasons on this slide. There's been some market infrastructure improvements in town, or enhancements to the town. We've got about 4.75 miles of linear trail that have come in the last few years. We've got the Bartlam South property, the former Chapman property, that we maintain at this point. We've got Fen Road, which hasn't become a big issue at this point, but certainly will become some kind of trail property, I'm sure. The Dimes, I call it the Dime Savings still, but it's the Yankee Expressway property that there's a parking lot being built now, and there's some interest by, I know, biking groups to possibly make extensive use of that area. We've got the dog park, which has been enhanced since we took over the operations of the groundskeepers. And then we're going to have a Railroad Avenue parking area at some point for the trail. In the wintertime, which is, we swing the groundskeepers into the snow operations, we typically only have about 2 groundskeepers to do sidewalks and that sort of thing, which is not ideal, obviously. And then number 3, we have an increased need for maintenance of these various facilities. You can see them on the screen. I won't read them to you, but there's definitely an increased need and maintenance for these. And the same with ball fields and athletic fields, which is number 4. There's a lot of tournaments that go on. We're most notably, between John Golick and his folks at Park and Rec and us, we're taking over McNamara Field, the maintenance of it. It was mostly done by volunteers for many, many years, probably decades, and they did a great job. But it seems like the volunteer effort is dwindling a little bit. So we're getting into that much more intensively with our full-time folks. John has been instrumental in getting sports onto the school fields to use them in the summer, but that takes more maintenance from our folks to kind of keep everything going. And just an increased volume of trash at towns, and which sounds like a small thing until you realize how many trash cans are out there that has to be emptied either every day or every other day throughout the parks, the trail, and all the buildings and everything else. So that's my pitch. But we are asking for an additional groundskeeper. We've kind of run everything to ground that we can as far as making the best use of the folks we have, and they're excellent folks. The groundskeepers we have are fantastic, and wouldn't trade them for the world. But we're just running out of hours in a given year with the 4 that we currently have.
All right, Mr. Walsh, I see your hand first.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, George, and you guys do an incredible job. There was some people who were asking, why aren't the linear trail parking lots, why weren't they cleared during the snow? As well as, the places where the pickleball courts were. My first question is, do you guys have like the pickleball courts locked, or are they open where somebody can go in and try to shovel? My concern is somebody trying to go in there with a metal shovel and that could ruin the courts. But, I know normally they take the nets down in the winter, but because you never know with the winter, they left them up. And I know that the parking lot wasn't plowed, but, I noticed people still playing there somehow.
Sure. Cheshire Park has never really been plowed for use in the winter in the past. That being said, this year, the tennis and pickleball courts got redone last year through Mr. Golick and his folks did a great job, wonderful facility there. And we, at his encouragement and others, we left the nets up this year through the winter. And a lot of it was due to the last few winters. We didn't get a lot of snow. So you could have gotten out there in the winter and played tennis if you wanted, or pickleball or whatever. This year, unfortunately, we got a lot more snow than we have the past few years. So there was a little bit of a disconnect there. And we're sorting that out with a policy that we're going to certainly run by the Park and Rec Commission and the council and others to kind of cover next winter, so that we don't have that disconnect again. But I think in short, we're going to try to support the uses of the parks as much as we can in the winter. They won't certainly be the first priority to plow, but as the courts kind of clear naturally, we'll certainly make sure the parking lots and things are able to be used. We did have a group this year that did shovel the courts at some point to clear them off. And we would hope that kind of nature would take its course on the courts, and then we'll make sure the parking lots follow. That would be my recommendation. But we'll certainly do whatever the commissions and the council determine the best fit. And just quickly for the trail, we're also the only parking lot on the trail. Well, there's 2 parking lots on the trail that are plowed and 2 that aren't. So Lock 12 and Cornwall are plowed and have been for years. The Jarvis lot has never been plowed because we don't plow that section of the trail. But it was brought up, rightfully so, that if a cross-country skier or a snowshoer wants to get in there, they do need someplace to park, and that's a valid point. So in the future, we're going to plan to plow the Jarvis parking lot again with the council and everybody's consent. And the West Main lot is kind of the jury's still out. That one's a little bit of an oddball because it's so tight in there. There's not a lot of places to put snow without damaging things. But certainly Jarvis could be done. That's not a problem.
Yeah, and what you mentioned, you had a group that came out and shoveled the pickleball courts. I'm just concerned about that because we spent a lot of money resurfacing those, and if somebody comes out there with a metal shovel and starts scratching it all up, I'd prefer that we don't allow that because you don't know. But like do you guys lock those and unlock them, or there's no lock on them?
We don't lock them.
Okay.
And that would be something, I think, if it ever happened, that recreation would probably, we could certainly put the lock on, but
Okay.
they would determine the use. That's more of a programming issue, obviously.
Okay.
I think
All right.
if we could just add to that, that this year, as George said, was a little bit of a perfect storm, no pun intended, because really for my 2 first years here, and including if you remember last January, there was a couple of 70-degree days. We were getting phone calls of people outraged that they couldn't be out on a beautiful 65, 70-degree day to play tennis, and we had taken all the nets down. So tired of those calls, we said, you know what, maybe it's global warming. I don't know what's happening. We've had warm spells. Let's leave them up and try to manage it. And then, of course, as George said, we had a snowpack that didn't leave for a better part of a month. So it's quite a Murphy's Law, I suppose. But I think a policy that everyone can agree to and that the council endorses would be beneficial for all of us, frankly, because we know it becomes a hot topic on Facebook forums and other places. So
Thank you.
Fix it.
Mr. Slocum?
Yeah, my question goes to contractual services. I know in considering another employee, while it may be justified, my first question would be, is there anything in any of this programming that could be a little cheaper, but get a lot of the work done with some contractual services? And I know it's a varied menu suite of what the work performed is, but I think we have to look at that. I really do.
Sure.
What do you think, George?
And I agree. We'd certainly like to explore that too, but these are union positions, so
But we don't have one yet. We don't have. You're looking for a
Correct.
new position, so I don't want a contractual service isn't a union yet. So is it
Right.
is it easier? I mean, if you're so they're going to suffer because we don't want to hire somebody and not consider contractual services. Is that sort of the catch-22 we're talking about here?
We certainly could consider it, but the work, the rights to the work, whether it be mowing the town buildings or mowing the parklets or mowing the trail or something, we could sub out, if you will, to a contractor. That is all union work at this point. And not to push it back on the union, but there'd have to be some negotiation there. Not that it can't be done, but it would take some more.
And we just inked a contract.
Right. That could come out outside the contract, but we weren't proposing changes at that point either in the contract.
No, and I understand that. It's just that there's always an obstacle because of the work rules and the work being done, and yet that creates the bit of a conundrum for consideration of things that could save the taxpayer some money. And I'm just tired of talking about that every second budget cycle, and I'm not discounting the fact that the workload hasn't increased. I mean, it's obvious that it probably has. I'm just looking for ways that we could actually legitimately meet the services of the taxpayer and the department. And before I approve another person, I feel that test has to be met. That's how I feel about it. And I don't want the poor guys to suffer, but I don't want the taxpayers to totally suffer either.
Sure. No, it's fair. It's got to be a trade-off on both sides as far as making it a beneficial thing. It's as you recall, when we took over and we took over with our eyes wide open, took over the operations of the ground. So, and I was here. I was the one, but we were trying to do it with one less person. We'd gotten rid of the foreman position at that time,
right?
And it was a working foreman. And as it turns out, that those hours were pretty critical. As I said, we've gone along, and to our credit, I'll leave me out of it, but Mark Cunningham, Rich Pruitt, those guys, they've made it work the way it is, and the 4 groundskeepers. So we're holding our own, but as we've added and added and added, we're getting thin, and it's you can see it in the way that we're having to use overtime or keep summer help on different things. And they're obviously, if there were another person, that would offset some of the overtime, some of the summer help we hire. We would obviously skinny that back. That's goes without saying. But it is, we are reaching that kind of breaking point where we're just too few and not enough hours.
In your budget, where you proposed this additional person, where have you pared back the overtime?
That we pushed that back up to the former number, and we figured that would be part of a larger discussion. If the council was considering a groundskeeper, we can give you some figures on that.
Well, I think you better be prepared for that, because that's going to be part of that conversation.
Sure.
Thank you, George.
All right. I would like, as somebody who's only been back on the council for the last year and a half, I would say that having been a private citizen a lot of the last few years, I can really see that the parks have been in good shape. Our public buildings have been in good shape over the last few years. And I would hate to see them not kept in good shape. And if we're continuing to add responsibilities to that department, we have to balance where we finally bite the bullet, and maybe there is some way of a halftime or more additional summer help or something like that might be able to work. But I'd like to see us continue to maintain and improve the maintenance as we have been, as the town has been the last few years. So. All right. Any other questions or comments?
A quick question.
Sure, Mr. Jinks.
The under the line 5104, the laborers, temporary, part-time, is that 7? We have 7 laborers, part-time laborers. Is that what that means?
Yeah, correct. We actually, it will be closer to 10. They're about 5,000. If they stay the entire summer, they're about $5,000 a piece. That's kind of what it works out for. So the 50,000 line item is probably closer to 10. That, I think that was probably a carryover from last year when we cut it back.
And there, even with that many, if we were to able to add a couple more and some additional summer help, it's still, you're saying there's still not nearly enough labor. We still have to hire another person.
Yeah, the hard thing
groundskeeper.
is, sure. The hard thing is that we need the kind of March, April, May is a heavy time, because the sports, every event, every entity who wants to be on fields or in parks is getting out and doing things. And that's the time where we can't really get these summer folks. Many of them are college kids. I guess not that we couldn't look for I don't want to call it a retiree, but somebody a little older, but it's, we kind of need a specific skill set to do that kind of work. And then again, in the fall, a lot of times you get to the September, October, November fall festival, different things. We have another heavy use for either fall sports or just kind of festivals and those type of things. So that's a heavy time. And then going into winter, we need them. We need folks for the sidewalk crew and maintenance and those types of things with snow and all the maintenance we do to the equipment and the picnic tables and the pavilions and all the things that those folks get tasked with kind of repairing and doing in the interim.
And what if we were to add, obviously Bartland Park South, we're looking at potential project there. Given the plans that are in place, or not in place, but the plans we've looked at to this point, how much sort of additional work do you foresee that kind of a plan being for you guys? Is that another whole person's job, or is it just a little more of everything that everyone's already doing?
It's gonna, if the turf field goes in, that's going to help us a great deal, certainly from a maintenance perspective. They still need maintenance, but that certainly would take away any kind of routine cutting or anything like that. So I could see that freeing up some hours. Unfortunately, like I said, we're this year we're taking over McNamara, so this person is already kind of has a park spoken for them before we start, and then the great lawn and the town green area, those are going to need to be get a lot of attention, just because they need to be a centerpiece of the town. So we would certainly need this person we're talking about, and we would certainly try to to make as best use of the 5 groundskeepers at that point that we can. But I would hope we could do it with that, but we would definitely need to give that a lot more thought, depending on the amenities that are installed there.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Other questions or comments from council members? All right, Mr. Orris.
Yes, thanks, Steve. Thank you, George. So for the clearing of the parks during the winter, the driveways and the parking lots, George, I think we should be doing that. I think the more access we can give our public to open space, particularly in light of what we just went through with the pandemic on days that aren't really rough for people, they want to get outside. And I was also disappointed to see that, a lot of these accesses were closed. You couldn't even get a car in there if you wanted to go for a walk somewhere. So I am a strong advocate for finding a way to at least get a lot of these places open for people to pull their cars in. I don't think in the wintertime it's going to add to our budget. You tend to tell us you staff for the summer months. The winter months, you have less to do. It doesn't need to be done during the height of the storm, but certainly a day or two thereafter, I see no reason why we're not plowing those facilities. So that's number one. Number two, I think when it gets to Mixville Park, we've invested a lot of money in the last year or so in our parks and open space. We invested in acquiring open space for many years. I think this council is trying to convert to improving and maintaining them better. I've been hearing a lot from our community about more usability in the wintertime at Mixville, whether it be, allowing sledding or not. I know there's a liability issue that we may need to talk about, but whether we like it or not, people sled there. And so, they're there anyway. So I think we need to look at that. I think we need to look at possibly creating a skating area there. It's a beautiful facility. We've invested in it. I think we need to potentially look at how we can open that facility a bit more in the wintertime as well. So, I think, I don't know that the winter months in terms of getting these facilities open really requires much more labor. I mean, I'm anxious to hear what you have to say, but I think the winter months are our slower period. So, that's kind of my overall thought. And I will tell you, following up on Mr. Slocum, across our budget, any new positions that we're looking at least from my perspective, we're going to have to do a very detailed cost benefit analysis because, the community is still hurting. I know, the real estate market is strong, but I'm hearing from many people in businesses and in the private sector and just residents that they're still struggling. And so, now is not the time to take our eye off our budget. And if there are going to be new positions, I'm going to be making sure with my one vote that we can underscore why there's a benefit to doing that and what those benefits are. And if we can't articulate that to the public as to why there's a benefit to doing it, I won't support it. So, certainly I think we need more from you on this position. From what I heard, I think Mr. Slocum's looking for it. And I'm going to be asking a lot more details about any new positions that people are asking for throughout the budget. So you guys do phenomenal work, George. I'm not trying to be overly negative, but, we do say a lot of good things and we got a great community here, but people are still hurting and we need to be as cost effective as we can be. And that is our job as elected officials to make sure we're doing as much as we can with as little tax impact as we can get. So that's how I see it, George. And I'd love to talk more about, you say you're going to run it through Park and Rec and everybody else about opening up these facilities. I think we should just do it. It shouldn't be an added cost. I'm not sure why we're not plowing them.
Sure. We obviously, I'm happy to discuss I'll take the last thing first, the position in whatever detail we need. And then we certainly recognize that that's an added cost to the taxpayers. And that's why we gave it 3.5 years before we came back and asked, because we wanted to try every avenue we could to kind of take a bite out of that apple or peel the onion or whatever analogy you want to use. Going back to Mr. Orris's first point, we certainly want to service Mixville well. There's no question. There's many things that can be done there. We one of the first storms of the January storm for sure, we left the gate open inadvertently, and folks drove in there and kind of packed all the snow down, so we didn't get to plow it. And next year, lesson learned, we'll make sure we shut the gates and until we can plow it the next day or right after the storm or whenever that happens, and we'll have better access for folks to be able to park in there. And then the hill and the skating, that's be in conjunction with Park and Rec, and we can certainly discuss that, and we'll be happy to support whatever activities. But I agree that the plowing part isn't going to add any cost to the budget, any material cost to the budget. We can certainly pull that off to whatever degree the council and the community desires us to do that.
And I'm sorry, George, just one more follow-up on that. I've heard from a lot of people that have been around town for a while that, for years, Mixville was always the place to go, even in the wintertime. And I think now more than ever, we need outlets for people that are outside. And so, I am very interested to talk about how we can put a little more formality to making Mixville more usable in the wintertime and providing more outlets, not only for our youth, but for everybody. So it's a beautiful facility. It's one of our crown jewels. I think we can do more to use it throughout the whole year. And I would like to be part of that conversation.
Sure. Just to piggyback on that, the Mixville is a fantastic facility. You couldn't replicate that again. I don't think, certainly not easily. And we're with the funding the council granted last year, we're trying to make improvements this year and following years, working with our colleagues in Park and Rec. So this year you'll see that there's going to be a new gatehouse there. The gatehouse kind of looks like the Titanic. We're going to replace that with something a little more modern. It's not going down by the bow. And we're going to re-sand the beach with beach sand, as the term implies. So there'll be a better beach experience there for folks who want to go in, and some other amenities. I know Mr. Golick is trying to get the basketball courts resurfaced there, kind of a sealant put on them to make them more usable and that sort of thing. So we're making incremental progress out there. I'll say that.
Thank you so much, George.
All right. Other questions or comments? All right. So we have public property.
Sure. If you turn backwards to page 47,
Yep.
that goes, that's in a whole different division of the budget book. And this budget again is going down slightly by 0.66%. So there.
Okay.
Got it, Marilyn? So this budget's going down by 0.66%. There's not a tremendous amount of change on page 47. One of the things I'll point out, 5202, we decreased the building materials. Mr. Kimball made a cut from my request. Some would say draconian cut, but others may not. But it's going down by about 8%, and a lot of that is a reflection of the LED lighting program that we did this past year. So the good news is we relamped all the town buildings, the interior of the buildings, with LED lights. We have a 10-year warranty on them for replacement and everything, and they're going to save the town about $45,000 a year in electric costs. So it saves both manpower from replacing bulbs and also electric costs. So it's a home run at that point. And then that line of the budget reflects that. And if you flip to page 48, you can kind of see many of our performance contracting and other energy efficiency measures are reflected in electricity, gas, and heating. Those are all either staying stable or going down by fairly significant amounts in cases of, as we go through the budget. So that's the good news, and we're going to continue to try to get every energy enhancement we can get to reduce our usage and reduce costs. And the council has been very active in that role, and you were certainly behind the LED relamping that's saving the town money currently and should for the next decade or more.
Questions or comments, Ms. Papano?
Yes, I'd like to ask, or maybe make a suggestion. Do you work with the Board of Education to buy any of the supplies, cleaning supplies or towels or toilet paper or any paper supplies? And if you do, could that not save you money?
We certainly crosstalk to talk about things that are available, but we don't formally purchase directly or in a combined way. So some of their needs are a little different than ours for products based on a school versus kind of an office building, which is mostly what we run. But a lot of the paper products and stuff have gone away with hand dryers and that sort of thing. There's obviously toilet paper still exists,
Right,
but
yeah.
but a lot of the other types of paper products have largely gone away. But it's a good point, and you can certainly get a large bang for the buck by buying together. There's no question.
Exactly. Thank you.
All right. Other questions or comments?
8:30.
So do we want to touch on the capital budget for a few minutes, or do we want to say we really are holding off?
We got a lot of work to do on the capital budget, Dave, and it's, we still have another portion of our meeting. My recommendation would be to push it off.
Okay, I would agree because we do have another of them coming up. So, all right, well, then this concludes the budget committee portion. Oh, Mr. Nawat?
Yeah, Mr. Rory, can I, if it pleases the council, the last couple slides are just our paving program for this year. If I can just put them up on the screen, I won't belabor it, but if folks are watching, they can kind of go back and we'll put it on the
Sure.
website, of course, but.
All right, we can accommodate that, sure.
Sure. So these are the capital slides, which we'll pitch to you at a different time. And then we'll go into the paving program. So we'll start with the most popular thing, which is chip seal. And we'll work our way down to mill and pave. But these are the roads we propose to chip seal. Many of them you'll see in the Sorghum Mill area, not the main Sorghum Mill, the spine road, I'll call it Sorghum Mill itself, but many of the cul-de-sacs and interconnecting roads off of it. And much of this chip seal is a double chip. So if you go to Leclerc or Barn Hill, you can see this in place. It looks a lot like asphalt pavement. It's a two sizes of chip seal and then a sealant on top of it, which is a great preservation technique that keeps the underlying pavement in good shape for a long period of time. And the underlying pavement on many of those roads is in good shape. So we can do that sort of thing and spend our money elsewhere. And if we flip to the next one, we're going to do a micro seal on several roads. And you can see that on Cornwall coming in from Route 10. That's a micro sealed road that was done several years ago. It's kind of an industrial strength driveway sealer, if you will, type of material. But it's held up really well and kept that road in very good condition over the last 4 years, I would say. So you can see there's Marks, Riverview Court, Spring Street, and Cortlandt Circle. Sections of those are all going to get done with that. And then the last one is mill and pave, which is everybody's favorite. That's actual paving, the traditional paving program. And you can see the roads we have teed up there: Wallingford Road, a section of Wallingford Road, a section of Williamsburg Road, Redstone Drive, Payne Drive, Split Rock Road, Sorghum Mill, the main road through Sorghum Mill, a section of West Johnson near where that new medical building is being built, sort of the western end of West Johnson, and then Norton Lane, which is a cut through from Route 70 to Cheshire Street, which has fallen into disrepair this last year, certainly, and even probably the year before a little bit. So that's our plan. And I know we can discuss this in the capital budget more, but I just wanted to get it out so folks know what our intentions are this summer.
So those are items that were approved. The money for those is already approved.
Correct. That was done at referendum this past November.
Right. Very good. Okay. Right. So that was informational. Thank you. All right. With that, I'll hand it back to Mr. Orrish for the continuation of the council meeting.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Bowery. Mr. Nawatney, thank you so much for your time tonight and answering our questions and your presentation. Thank you for all your hard work.
Thank you.
Before we go to our executive session, I want to congratulate Sean and Arnett and Jim Jascott and certainly all of Jim's staff on the reaffirmation of our AAA credit rating, which was really important, particularly on the heels of a very tough year or so with the pandemic. And also on what I think is an extraordinarily well done bond sale, which resulted in about $820,000 of savings throughout the entire term. Sean, is that correct?
Yeah, for the next 11, yeah, over the next 10 years. Yep.
And what was shocking to me was that the refinance portion was 0.93%.
Yeah.
And the new bonding was 1.57%. I wouldn't think anybody would be looking to make that little amount of money on their investment, but that just underscores to me, that this is a lot of hard work and fiscal prudence on behalf of this community. And it's certainly a result of our continued commitment to a very strong and sound fiscal policy. And Sean, you and Arnett and Jim and all of our department heads and all of our employees deserve a big kudos because everybody plays a major part in that. And I also want to thank all of my fellow council members that I'm sitting here with because you all played a large role in that as well. So this collaboration of all of these individuals I just mentioned, continue to show to this community that we're working hard, we're trying to do more with less, and that we're making strong, solid fiscal decisions for this community. And this recent refinance and the reaffirmation of our AAA credit rating, to me, truly underscores that when so many other municipalities are struggling, we're doing well. And that's a testament to all those I just mentioned and certainly the community at large. So I thought I'd be remiss without bringing that up tonight. So with that, I'd like to entertain a motion to go into executive session to discuss personnel matters to include our town manager, Sean Kimball.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh.
Second.
Romano. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. And Jim Jascott, I see you sitting back there again. Jim, I got to tell you, buddy, you deserve one big thumbs up for this hard work you've done in the last, I know it was many, many months of hard work, but man, you really delivered in the last few days. So congratulations. Thank you and your staff for all your hard work.
Thanks, Rob. I couldn't be happier myself with the results of that sale.
Yeah, well, a lot of it is a result of you and your staff, Jim. So thank you so much.
Thanks.
Okay. So Sean, let us know when we're ready for executive session.
Rob, I think Marilyn had a question.
Yes,
Who seconded that motion? Does anybody know?
Ms. Pavano.
Oh, thank you, Sandy. I didn't get that.
And before we go in, Mr. Slope, did you have something? I thought I saw you raise your hand. No, you're muted.
I was waving goodbye to George in response to his wave and congratulating with my thumbs up, Mr. Jascott.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And
Have a great holiday, everybody.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay,
Excuse me.
buddy.
All
Enjoy,
right, good night. Marilyn, good night.
enjoy the Easter weekend, everybody.
You too,
Good night.
Marilyn. Thank you.
Good night, Marilyn.
Happy
Good
Easter,
night.
everybody, if we don't see you.
Yeah, and there will be no action after, so I can
No.
take over the host.
Okay.
Arnett.
Sean, I made you host, but can you make me host just so I can shut everything down and then leave?
Can I just, what happens if I just hit stop live stream? Does that
Oh,
do it?
well, if you hit